critical. If you talk to Palestinians, the two things, it's homes and education. Because of course, so education is central to their recovery. And for them, it's not about just catching up on learning, it's dignity, it's identity, and it's that better future. And by that, I mean, when I've seen water systems, sewage systems repaired, generators repaired without the parts, that's because of ingenuity, that's because of education. When I see 30 students graduating at Al Shifa Hospital to be surgeons, that's their education. When I see teachers working with very limited supplies, that's because of education. So every Palestinian knows if they are to recover, it's education. So Nick, UNICEF, we've got more than 130,000 children into temporary learning spaces. That's been a remarkable increase, but there's 700,000 children here. We need much more. And to answer your question on supplies, no. So I sit in a temporary learning space with 14-year-old girls who are immaculately dressed, many of whom have incredible English, and there's 3 girls to a desk and there's barely a pencil on the desk. So the most basic school supplies remain restricted. And I'm talking pencils, pens, and notebooks. And that goes as well for recreation kits. Recreation kits are about play. We're talking about the most essential critical materials for children to start to recover from trauma. When I talk to trauma counselors, they're like, I say, what are your tools? Their tools, Nick, they say, are 2-part. One is like breathing techniques and the other is drawing. But they don't have paper, they don't have crayons. I see children having had a piece of paper where they've written on both sides and now they're writing on a side again. So whether it comes recreation kits for trauma or whether it comes education supplies, we keep pushing, the denials keep coming.
Thank you, James. I apologize for the noises. You know, there's a little bit of a construction. If it gets to be too much, perhaps we can, ask them to stop temporarily and perhaps also raise the volume a little bit in the room. Let's go to John Zarkostis.
Good morning, James, and Happy New Year. Following up on the details you gave us in the beginning of the briefing, Gaza had one eye hospital. Is that not functioning, or is it repaired and functioning again? And secondly, do you have any data how many children have lost their eyesight completely or partially?
Gosh. Hello, John. Very good questions. I don't know on the eye hospital, but we have a brilliant health colleague not far from me. I will find out and come straight back to you after this briefing. And I'm not sure if it's been desegregated that way. It's a very good question on eyesight. Certainly the 2 wounded children I saw in the last couple of days, both children, it links to Nick's question, both children would recover with surgery that they need, but the surgery cannot be done here. So again, we are still at a point where some basic medical supplies are blocked. And to link back to your point on eyesight, that includes also things for hearing aids, and that includes, things like wheelchairs. So there is a long, long way to go, but I'll come back certainly on the eye hospital and do my best, John, on numbers around eyesight, just as we tried so long on things like amputations and injuries in general that will permanently incapacitate a child.
Next up, I've got Gabriela Sotomayor online. Go ahead, Gabriela.
Thank you. Good morning to all. Thank you, James. I don't know how to ask this question, but I will try. You mentioned that drones and everything are targeting children. So my question is there do you see a level of interest in kind of ethnic cleansing? I mean, because children, if you kill children, they don't grow old and they are not more, Palestinians there. So what is your comment on that?
Gabriela, hi. Look, UNICEF is very clear on this. It's impossible for us to try and understand the intent, but it's very difficult at the moment for Palestinians to continue to restart their lives, right? All the sectors that the devastation to homes is unprecedented. 85 to 90% of schools damaged or destroyed. And I mentioned earlier why education here is so critical if there is to be a recovery. and we can't get in notebooks and pencils. And of course, the 100 children now is remarkable, of course, because it's another 100 families grieving during a ceasefire for children killed. But of course, it's only added on top of 20,000, the reports of 20,000 girls or boys. So there are a whole range of factors, the devastation of agriculture, the devastation of a healthcare system, the famine, Gabriella, there's been very good news that was talked about late last year that for the first time, a minimum food basket, it's like 3 different types of food that children were getting. That's very, very good news. It's very good news. Famine is on retreat. But it simply underlines that this was always man-made. As we've said dozens of times, this was always a political decision. This was engineered. This was not a logistical problem. Once we were allowed to get foodstuffs in, once we were allowed to restart nutritional centres, once we were allowed to get enough emergency nutritional supplies in, then that's the impact it has. But understand that if you're a 2 or 3-year-old child, all or most of your life, you've suffered nutritional deprivation, and that has lifetime consequences, almost impossible to reverse. And some of those consequences are around the intellectual capacity of children. So all those things combined may push somewhere towards the answer you're looking for. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got a question from Catherine Fiancon-Bokonga. Go ahead, please.
Good morning to all. Good morning, James, and Happy New Year. My question is a follow-up of John's question regarding children who need to go under surgery. Are there children supposed to leave the country and be accepted abroad, and that are who are not allowed to fly out? Are you still waiting for authorizations for these children to leave the country with a parent?
Yes, we are. And I have spoken, even in this last trip, to many, many children and families who either, okay, if I think of yesterday, the child will have his leg amputated. The boy we mentioned today, Abid al-Rahman, he will lose sight in an eye, maybe both. The girl in Shifa Hospital may well die. All 3 of those are absolute candidates for medical evacuation. All 3 of those have so far been denied. They've been through a formal process. They have all been denied. We're probably still around 2,000 children who require medical evacuation. So we've not seen anything near like the improvement we need, both in terms of getting them out, utilising the West Bank corridor. If you need more on that, I think Ricardo can speak to it. So it's both about medical evacuations have ebbed and flowed. For a time in the first stages of the war, many children went through Rafah. As soon as Rafah closed, we saw a 90% reduction. So the remarkable luck of a child surviving an airstrike and the horrors that brings of shrapnel and fire in their home, only then to die from their wounds over weeks because they were banned from leaving. Then that changed and more children were allowed out. But because of the Rafah crossing, we weren't seeing countries open their doors, hospital doors, nor their hearts. I'm talking European countries, North America, Australia. That was not happening. We're still not seeing that to nearly enough. There are countries like Italy who've taken a relatively large number. There are many other Western European nations who have taken a grossly inadequate number of children who quite simply their lives would be saved, their limbs would be saved if they could make that fairly straightforward journey.
Yeah, just to add to that, when I was last in Gaza, that is what really stayed with me, the amount of parents outside health clinics or temporary shelters waving papers showing that they've done everything they could to try and get their children evacuated from Gaza, and yet things were not moving. And obviously when you have such life-threatening injuries, as James mentioned, on kids across the strip, and at that time there wasn't a ceasefire, every day counts, and it was just not moving fast enough, and it's beyond just an issue of opening crossings like Rafah, as James mentioned, but also political will from UN member states and countries to absorb that demand and support Palestinian children who are fighting for their lives and yet cannot get the medical attention they so desperately need.
Thank you very much, both. Catherine, I see your hand is still up. I don't know if you have a follow-up.
Yes, thank you, Michele, for giving me the floor back. It's regarding the figure about children waiting for leaving the country or would need to leave the country. James, you spoke about 2,000. You mentioned 2,000 children. Does it mean that 2,000 children should leave the country? Or how many out of them have their exits, has the exit been denied, refused? Could you clarify these figures? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Look, so medical evacuations is a WHO mandate, and they have been, to be quite frank, tireless and brilliant on that. I've seen what they've done, both in terms of going through the crossfire, but also in terms of the bureaucracy. So I do want to defer to them, but I know it's more than 4,000 people have been approved in that process for medical evacuation. Then whether they are approved to actually leave by the authorities is a different matter. Of that 4,000, and I was trying to find this number, I believe it's around half. That means 2,000 children have satisfied the criteria for medical evacuation. Now, some of those will have the diseases that we see children suffer and get treated with quite easily in other countries, right? But the vast majority are wounds where if they don't get treated, as I say, they lose an eye, they have an amputation, and or they just continue to live in immense pain. But it is around 2,000 who've satisfied the criteria and are now waiting for the approval by the authorities to get out of Gaza and to have a third country to go to.
Thank you very much, James. I'm looking to see if there are any further questions on this. We appreciate your time. We appreciate the stress and strain of your 7th mission in Gaza. I've got Christian, perhaps he wants to come in on this topic since you mentioned WHO. Christian, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, James. And Jen, thanks for this update. Just a few words on the evacuation process as it just came up now. And let me remind everybody, we also have a press conference with the DG today at 1:30 this afternoon. But on the topic, one thing, before the conflict, before the war, we had 50 to 100 patients evacuated from the Gaza Strip on a daily basis. Let that sink in. Now the procedure is extremely complicated. It's from starting with a medical doctor needs to refer and needs to certify the need for an evacuation. Then people need to send that recommendation to a referral committee. Finally, this referral committee approves the person and that patient list goes to WHO. This list gets submitted. That's then when people have a referral in hand, but that's the beginning of the process. Unfortunately, it goes further. It needs security clearance at the very end from the Israeli authorities. It needs a country to pick up and accept medevac people and patients and their companions. And these last two steps are very often where, despite the referral papers in hand, despite the system in Gaza ready to go and ready to evacuate, we still cannot evacuate patients, and they either do not get accepted outside or cannot leave because of the companions, for security clearance, what have you. So the process is extremely tiring and unfortunately deadly long. It's a lethal process nearly for some. We can't speed it up at this point.
Thank you for coming in on that, Christian. I don't know whether you want to say a little bit more now briefly about the press conference that you mentioned, or whether you'll come back later.
If I'm on, thank you very much. I can do that right away. Yes, that's the only thing to say. We have at 1:30 today, so that's already in 2.5 hours. DG press conference, you have all seen the invitation, and it's also on, especially on health taxes, today. There are two reports. You can have the reports beforehand. Many of you have already asked for it. If you haven't done so, please check with media inquiries for the reports that will be discussed today, amongst many other topics. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. Thank you very much to James Elder in Gaza. Thank you to Ricardo here in Geneva. And we're now going to move on to Jeremy Lawrence from the human rights side. And you've got 2 items for us, right?
Thanks, Michele, and good morning, everyone. As you will have seen, the High Commissioner has just issued a statement, or is issuing a statement imminently on Iran. We are horrified by the mounting violence directed by security forces at protesters across Iran, as reports indicate hundreds have been killed and thousands arrested. The killing of peaceful demonstrators must stop. The labelling of protesters as terrorists to justify violence against them is unacceptable. We urge the Iranian authorities to halt immediately all forms of violence and repression against peaceful protesters and to restore full access to the internet and telecommunications services. As we saw most recently in 2022, broad sections of the Iranian population have taken to the streets, demanding fundamental changes in the governance of their country. And once again, the authorities' reaction is to inflict brutal force to repress legitimate demands for change. This cycle of horrific violence cannot continue. The Iranian people and their demands for fairness, equality, and justice must be heard. All killings, violence against protesters, and other human rights violations must be investigated in line with international human rights norms and standards, and those responsible held to account. Several hospitals are reportedly overwhelmed by the number of casualties, including children. Nationwide internet and telecommunication shutdowns are one of the main challenges to full verification. There are reports indicating that members of security forces have also been killed. It is also extremely worrying to see public statements by some judicial officials indicating the possibility of the death penalty being used against protesters through expedited judicial proceedings. The High Commissioner stresses that Iranians have the right to demonstrate peacefully. Their grievances need to be heard and addressed, and not instrumentalized by anyone.
Thank you, Jeremy. I expect there might be some questions on that. I see a couple in the room. I think Jeremy first. So, go ahead.
Thank you, Jeremy. Wait there. Was wondering, I know communications have been cut, but has your office been able to verify any of the figures around the casualties? And the second question would be, has your office been asking the Iranian authorities access to Iran lately?
Starting with your first question, yes. We have problems verifying information, namely because 2 reasons. Our office doesn't have direct access to Iran. Secondly, because of the internet shutdown. Now, from what I've heard this morning is that to an extent there has been a partial restoration of telephone services, but there's still serious issues with the internet. With respect to our office, yes, we are in touch with the Iranians over this, as we have been in the past. Similarly, with respect to the 22 protests following the killing of Mahsa Amini. And we will continue to engage with them. Would we like access to Iran? Of course. Yeah, we don't.
I've got Emma Forage online. Go ahead.
Yeah, just to repeat the question, please, from my colleague. have you verified any of the deaths yourselves? I know you have difficulties, but have you confirmed any and how many? And do you have any details of mass arrests as well? Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Emma. So just to more or less repeat what I said to Jeremy, is that we're getting information from various sources on the ground. These are reliable sources. The number that we're hearing is hundreds, and that's what's been reported. I cannot give you a precise verified number. That's not possible. We're just not in a position to do that, I'm afraid. Sorry. With respect to arrests, yes, there are thousands of arrests have taken place. That's what we're hearing, the same. You're probably hearing the same from your sources on the ground. In Iran as well. Obviously, the concern is, you'll recall after the 22 protests, that there was the threat of the death penalty being imposed against those who participated in the protests. In fact, since those protests in 2022, at least 12 people have been executed directly in connection with those protests. That is our concern at this stage as well.
Okay, so we'll go to Alexandre in the room for AFP, and then to Satoko online. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. The United States has stated its readiness to intervene in Iran. What would be your thoughts on these threats and the potential consequences of such an intervention?
First and foremost, as the High Commissioner said in his statement, there is concern that it's been instrumentalised, the protests, and it shouldn't be instrumentalised by anyone. When it comes to human rights, it's protection, the right to protest peacefully. And we'll say that, you've heard us say it here hundreds of times, so nothing changes. And that should be respected by Iran. The excessive use of force in respect to the protests is, a violation of international law. We would like to think the best way forward for this is dialogue, obviously, and for the people of Iran who have got legitimate grievances, for their grievances to be heard and to be able to express them peacefully in demonstrations or otherwise.
Thank you. So Satoko, and then we'll go to Jamie in the room.
Yes, thank you very much for doing this. You said there are reports indicating that the members of security forces have also been killed. Do you know the number of the security forces who are killed and injured? And secondly, who have been actually attacking the security forces? As you said, Iranians have the right to demonstrate peacefully. Thank you.
Again, I'm afraid I'm going to have to disappoint you because I can't give you precise numbers, verified numbers. The Iranian authorities have said a number of their security forces have been killed during the process of the demonstrations. I can't go much more than that.
Jamie.
Good morning, Jeremy. There have been reports of an opening of some phone lines out of